So, welcome everyone. We are going to be discussing Mazel Tov, the phrase Mazel Tov, and an article and the concept of astrology in Judaism. And at every wedding I conduct, just before we get to the breaking of the glass, I make a big deal out of people practicing to shout Mazel Tov when you break the glass. And then part of my standard wedding spiel is, if you ask 100 Jews for the literal definition of Mazel Tov, 99 and a half of them will get it wrong. So that is going to be the discussion. And some of you may have read ahead or heard me talk about this before. But when you think about how Mazel Tov has been used, in your world, how would you say it's been used?
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
But that's not what it means, but that's what people.
Right.
Yeah, good luck, congratulations, but I think of it as good stars.
Yeah, well, good stars is definitely more literal. I would say most people I ask cold about this will say good luck. And one of my most interesting discussions I had once following a wedding was there was an Israeli, I don't know, probably a waiter or bartender or something at the wedding, and he heard me give this talk, and he got into an argument with me about whether I was correct in discussing what the word mazal means, and he insisted that I was in error, and being an Israeli, he was not shy about correcting me vociferously, particularly on a subject of Hebrew, which I would definitely be deferential to an Israeli on. Okay. So, any other comments about Mazel Tov?
Okay. Well, I mean, I think some of its origins relates to astrology, in terms of that the alignment of the stars and the constellations are right to bring you good fortune.
Right, and that's what we're going to get into. So first,
that's un-Jewish.
I'm sorry?
I thought that is un-Jewish to use.
And that's why we're going to discuss it. As you probably have figured out by now, the things I really like to get into are the ones that go contrary to everything you ever thought was true. So, and Mazel Tov is one example. So I presume you can see the Wikipedia article on Mazel Tov.
Yes, yes.
Unlike most Wikipedia articles, this one is actually pretty short. It's really only one page of text. So I'll read the introduction and then ask for a volunteer on etymology and pronunciation. So Mazel Tov or Mazal Tov, you can see the Hebrew letters there. Literally, good fortune is a Jewish phrase used to express congratulations for a happy and significant occasion and event. And again, the Sephardic pronunciation would be Mazal Tov, and the Ashkenazi pronunciation, which is identical to Yiddish, would be Mazel Tov. And most of us that grew up in an Ashkenazi environment know it as Mazel Tov. Bryce.
Yeah, my only thing I wanted to say is the idea of what the concept of what something means. You can talk about its origin of meaning, and you can talk about what it means today to people. And I enjoy doing this because I enjoy finding out what the nugget or the kernel underneath the story is, as you well know. But what I think I just want to make clear that when we say what it means, to most Jews, they're right. It means, hey, this is great. Congratulations.
Yes. And I would say the one thing I absolutely agree with you is most people will say it means good luck. But good luck is something sort of that you're asking for the future. So if somebody's going in to take a big test, you wouldn't say Mazel Tov to them. Wow. And we'll see in Hebrew, you'd say B'hatzlacha. But it's more congratulations that something good has already happened to you. But the reason I think the origin is interesting is because it does speak to astrology. And as Jerry, commented, most of us don't believe that Judaism has a very favorable view toward astrology. And as we'll see that that's not necessarily true.
I'm sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
So when you say astrology and we think of what we're discussing, I think of the customs in Jewish tradition, which would be considered superstition.
So yeah, I would say, because I don't believe in astrology, that astrology is one subset of superstition. And there are
Okay.
lots of other forms of Jewish superstitions, poo-poo Kanahara, and astrology is one of them.
Thank you.
Okay, so would someone like to read it? Etymology and pronunciation.
No one else wants to, I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Bryce.
The word mazel comes from the biblical Hebrew mazal, meaning constellation, or in Mishnaic Hebrew, astrological sign, and may be related to the verb
Nun Zion Lamed.
meaning to flow down.
And so
The
I want to
phrase-
just make a quick comment that Hebrew changes. So, I mean, there's a mention here, that might actually be another interesting subject, of biblical Hebrew, which in Hebrew is called Ivrit Tanachit, for the Tanakh. You might recognize the word Tanakh in there.
Hmm.
And then I think most of you study enough with us to understand the Mishnah comes later, and the Mishnah is written in Hebrew, but the Hebrew is later than biblical Hebrew. So it's often called Mishnaic Hebrew. And then there's medieval Hebrew, and there's sort of rabbinic Hebrew, which has a lot of Aramaic phrases in it. So there's not just one form of Hebrew. And also interesting to me is when Ben Yehuda decided to resurrect Hebrew as the language of the Holy Land, he consciously selected biblical Hebrew rather than the later Hebrew forms. Okay. And
Interesting.
Sorry?
I say that's interesting that he went back to the
Yeah, he went back to the Bible.
Torah. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and of course, if you want to get technical, you will find different levels of Hebrew even inside the Bible. The Bible texts are written over a very long period of time, and one of the ways scholars date biblical texts has to do with the way the text is written, whether certain vowels are explicit or sort of hidden, and also certain terms, like I can't remember the details, but the word for crown is different in earlier text and later text. So that that's sort of it's almost textual archaeology, which I find very interesting. Okay,
That
so let's
follows
continue
into the documentary hypothesis.
Yes.
Okay, so the phrase Mazel Tov first appears in Geonic Hebrew, where it means positive astrological sign or simply good fortune.
Okay, so here we go. So Geonic Hebrew, probably Gaonic Hebrew, I think, is the Hebrew of the Geonim. Who are the Geonim? These are the folks who are in charge of the Jewish people in Babylonian exile. The Babylonian exile begins in 586 BCE, and they're living we are living quite peacefully under the rule of Babylonian and then Persian rule, and the head person of the Jewish community was called the Gaon. So there's going to be a different style of Hebrew there. And then they're going to talk about medieval Hebrew in the next sentence. Keep going.
The medieval Hebrew song Siman Tov U Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov, Yehe Lamu Ulkol Yisrael.
Yeah, so there's a song. Siman Tov, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov, Siman Tov, and so on. Yehe Lanu, Yehe Lanu, Yehe Lanu, Uvechol Yisrael. So we hear this all the time. Whenever a happy thing happens, people will often burst into that song. So why don't you continue with the meaning? A good sign?
A good sign, a good omen. Let it happen for us and for all Israel. was used to congratulate, and the phrase itself acquired a congratulatory usage in Yiddish and Hebrew by the early 19th century and was later incorporated into modern Hebrew. The Yiddish and Ashkenazic pronunciation of Mazel has the stress on the first syllable, while the modern Hebrew word Mazal has the stress on the last syllable. Mazel Tov is also used as a personal name.
Although I don't think I've ever met or heard of anyone named Mazel Tov.
Well, the phrase Mazel Tov is recorded as entering into American English from Yiddish in 1862, pronounced Mazel Tov, Tov, Tov. The word mazel was lent to a number of European languages meaning luck, such as German as Mazel, Hungarian as Mazli, Dutch as Mazel, and the verb mazelen, to be lucky. The word tov also entered Dutch as tof, toffee, nice or great, and German as tofte, dufte.
Oh, that's interesting.
Actually, it would be pronounced tufta. Mazel Tov is literally translated as good luck in its meaning as a description, not a wish. The implicit meaning is good luck has occurred, or your fortune has been good, and the expression is an acknowledgement of that fact. It is similar in usage to the word congratulations and conveys roughly, I am pleased this good thing has happened to you. A common Hebrew phrase for wishing good luck is Bahatzlacha.
Bahatzlacha. Actually, again, accent on the last. So in Sephardic pronunciation, generally speaking, the emphasis is on the last syllable. In Ashkenazi pronunciation, it is often on the second to the last syllable. So why don't you just but so it's Bahatzlacha, literally meaning with success. So that's how you would wish someone who is going, to do something, taking a test, and you would say Bahatzlacha, which means I'm wishing you success in this endeavor. Alan.
I would just add the way I look at it is that modern Hebrew pronunciation that we've adopted is the Sephardic pronunciations, but it isn't separate in a way that historically Sephardic is separate, because you can be Ashkenazi and still conform to modern Hebrew pronunciation, as does the practices in the Reform movement's books.
Yeah, so that's actually, that's a whole interesting subject in itself. So I would say the Sephardic pronunciation typically applied to Jews living in Muslim lands, so-called Mizrahi Jews. And Israel, Palestine, has, since for many hundreds of years been a land basically governed by Muslims. So the Israelis, I shouldn't call them Israelis, but the Jews living in Israel during these hundreds of years, there were not very many of them, typically spoke Hebrew with the Sephardic accent, or Sephardic pronunciation. And the counter to that would be the Hasidic Jews, in particular, Jews of Eastern Europe that went to Israel. So today, if you go to Israel, almost everyone will be using the Sephardic pronunciation, and that will be taught in the schools. But if you bump into Hasidic Jews and you're speaking Hebrew with them, it shouldn't surprise you to know they speak Yiddish, and they also would speak Hebrew with an Ashkenazi pronunciation.
The formality that maybe I'm trying to convey is that when the leaders of the state of Israel were analyzing the language when the state was created, the state officially uses a particular pronunciation of how you say Hebrew. We all identify the historical Sephardic part, but when the Reform movement decided to, jump in with, into the deep end with Zionism, we also, we're going to use the pronunciation of modern, the state of Israel and not focus on whether it's called Ashkenazi or Sephardic.
Yeah, and when I went to Hebrew school, we learned the Ashkenazi
Oh,
pronunciation.
me too. Absolutely. I had to retrain myself to not say.
Yes. And I actually had one professor at HUC who insisted, he was the professor of law, and he insisted on the Ashkenazi pronunciation for both Hebrew and Aramaic. And that would drive us a little crazy, but you put up with it.
All right.
Can I ask a question about the meaning of about how it means something good has happened to you is being acknowledged? Because that's how I see it. But when I get a birth announcement from the Chabad family, and they start out with Mazel Tov, we had a baby. Mazel Tov, we had a baby.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like they're saying a good thing has happened to us or to me, not to you. So that's a little bit different.
Yeah, that in a way, it is just saying a good thing has happened, whether it's happened to you, to me, or whomever. But yes, that's an interesting take on it. Okay, I think we're in the second paragraph here on the usage.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting too is you're saying that the pronunciation with the Sephardic is ultimate pronunciation, so the last syllable, b'chatzlacha, okay, and that Ashkenazi is b'chatzlacha, okay.
I think that's true. There's other differences. I mean, I'm sorry. Go
But
ahead.
the other thing that's interesting too is that English is anti-penultimate, so it would be b'chatzlacha. You see, if we were pronouncing it with the pronunciation of English, I mean, it's just so interesting that the different languages have such a different emphasis on the syllables.
Yes,
Changes the music.
and it's not a completely
consistent
rule even in Hebrew. So, for example, you know the word for king, it's melech, accent on the first syllable. Even in Sephardic Hebrew, it's melech or geffen, and so on. So there's all kinds of different counter examples that there would be in any language which is not perfectly regular. And
customs, would you say, possibly?
Sorry?
These pronunciations, like we're
it's the way the language works.
Custom.
I mean, it's the way people speak. But it is definitely true that if you have, geffen and melech is two, the vowel is called a segol. It's two little, a triangle, an upside down triangle of dots, if you are familiar with that. So that's always, the pronunciation is always on the first one. And
which way is a triangle upside down? I don't know. Which way is a triangle right side up? I don't know. I'm just really trying to figure out which one it is.
Two dots are horizontal above, and the single dot is
okay. So it's two dots above and one below. Got it.
Using a limited number. Yeah, that's good. It's this.
Thank you.
No, it's the other way. Yeah. So anyway, but yes.
Please don't tell me it's the other way.
Okay. Okay. Let's continue.
Throughout the Jewish world, including the diaspora, Mazel Tov is a common Jewish expression at events such as a bar or bat mitzvah or a wedding. For example, in Israel, at a Jewish wedding, it is shouted by the couple's friends and family after the ceremonial breaking of the glass. In Israel, the phrase is used for all sorts of happy occasions, such as getting a new driver's license, a birthday, or getting a new job.
Yeah, and so that's actually the end of this article. So you have a little picture here of somebody breaking a glass and shouting Mazel Tov. And then this is, I don't know how many are familiar, this is Hebrew sort of cursive writing. So that most of the Hebrew that you're familiar with is block writing, but when Israelis are writing Hebrew, it's much easier to write it using a different font, I would describe it.
Of course, but what's interesting about the breaking of the glass, usually it's like a light bulb, people substitute a light bulb instead of breaking a really nice wine glass. But at some point, with all the LEDs around, light bulbs are going to be so rare, okay, that they're going to be too valuable to break, and people are going to be breaking wine glasses instead.
Or they will ask Rabbi Lotker to conduct their wedding, and Rabbi Lotker does something which I actually did today because I have a lot of weddings coming up. I go to Goodwill or a thrift store, and I find long, thin glasses that are easy to break. And no matter what the couple tells me, I bring a glass for them to break, because sometimes they will bring a heavy goblet. I had couples bring compact fluorescents to break. And I had my my favorite one was a couple that brought a light bulb, no problem. But I thought it was singularly inappropriate light bulb to break at a wedding because it was a 3-way light bulb. And the only problem that I had was, who could I tell about this, that they were going to break a 3-way? And I finally figured I could tell the band, and we all got a good laugh out of it. Chris, I think you were raising your hand, but I'm not sure.
I wasn't actually, but I was planning to. So
okay. Yeah, that's astrology for you.
There we go. See, it works. So yeah, I did have a question about, it seemed like you were saying the timing of Mazel Tov becoming specifically more to do with a sign, not just stars, but that the stars are somehow affecting life. Seem to come from the Babylonian exile period. So my question is, it seems like they were warm to that idea then, but a lot of the Torah it finished after the exile, or it definitely got, finalized after the exile. So what are your thoughts on, it does seem like worshiping stars or stars that having any power is very, poo-pooed in the Torah. So yeah, what are your thoughts on like that?
Okay, well,
like those are opposite things.
That is a perfect segue into the next article, which is, can you see it? Jewish views on astrology? Yeah, because actually, it doesn't depend what my views are, because I'm not, anyway, that's what this article is about. But actually, before we look at the article, I want to show you, this is actually from a presentation I did on Fiddler. And I know that the lighting is not great on this. So for those of you who have seen the movie, there's a couple of scenes photographed in the synagogue, and it was an old wooden synagogue, which was, a real phenomenon in Eastern Europe, and mostly destroyed by the Nazis. So if you look at this as a scene, you can see there are things on the wall, and among the things on the wall are prayers. So some of you, again, who know Hebrew a little bit, can see V'hayu hadbarim ha'ela asher anochim etzavacha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta ba'am v'shivtecha v'veitecha. So common prayers would actually be on the walls of these synagogues. I think this is Tzur Yisrael, and this is Tikab b'shofar. So other important phrases. And then there's a whole wall here that's beautifully illustrated, and what you see here are signs of the zodiac. And so I just want to point out, so this says Mazal Kislev Keshet. So the constellation for Kislev is a month of the year, or first 7th month of the year, but we have Rosh Hashanah, and the sign of the Kislev is a bow. So there's a bow, and Mazal Cheshvan Akrab, yeah, which is a crab, and that's the sign of Scorpio. So you actually see it quite explicitly, but very briefly in the film. One of the fun things about watching the film, the way I do it in this presentation, I can stop it and and ask you to focus on it. So it's really for me, it's fascinating. Yeah, I think. Okay.
Well, so, I dated a girl once. The crab is Cancer. Cancer constellation. That one is anyway, astrologically that one's Cancer.
I don't know a thing about
So,
astrology.
so Scorpio is a scorpion, but that's not a crab. So maybe it's a different translation. Maybe that doesn't mean crab. Maybe that
And that
means
looks like a
scorpion.
scorpion to me rather than a crab. Alan.
Exactly.
Well, I'm enjoying the contradiction to kashrut in these animals,
Yeah,
but
yes.
but
Don't eat them.
if you're not eating them, just like other materials like pigskin,
Mhm.
footballs, it's not a violation of kashrut. So but my point to bring up was the following. I heard a presentation many years ago about the creative way in which quite a number, maybe a couple dozen synagogues have used their prayers in wood on the walls. And the starting point of that presentation had to do with the absence of printed Sidurim.
So my only comment on that, I mean, there are standard prayers as you saw, at least in Fiddler, where here is the one that a lot of us know is this is the V'ahavta.
Right.
And this is Ashrei Ha'am. So this is a psalm. The only thing I would say is that most Jews attending synagogues, particularly in this time frame, would have a Siddur, and they would probably know the service by heart anyway.
Well, that may be true, but in the century that I don't have enough recollection of the presentation, but the point I was making is there was some significant aspect of the benefit of having the prayers visible. Like we have what Dan Medwin, who you probably know, Rabbi Dan Medwin, he invented something called visual tefillah, which we now use on screens all the time. But 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it was a heresy to actually put a prayer book on the screen on the bima, so you didn't have to use a prayer book.
It would certainly be violating the Sabbath because you'd be using an electrical device. So that pretty much limits it to reform. And then
the heresy was just unconventional. It wasn't actually in a biblical, in a law reason, a reform. It was when I went to the first, then because of Zoom, you don't even think anything about going to service with that. Yeah,
right.
Thanks.
And in many synagogues now, including Adat Elohim, they will be projecting the prayers on a screen above the bima, so people can be using a prayer book, or they can simply be following along on the the projected image. Okay, so I am going to close this one. And by the way, yeah, I presume you could see it, because sometimes when you saw the Fiddler stuff, yes, okay, good. Okay, Jewish views on astrology. So, Chris, you feel like reading since you asked this question? There's like a 10-page answer to the question. So if you,
Great.
So if you and I don't think we're going to get through it this evening, but we can start.
I'm going to butcher all the Hebrew words though.
Okay, yeah, don't worry about it. I'll jump in with the Hebrew.
Okay, great. Astrology has been a topic of debate among Jews for over 2,000 years. While not a Jewish practice or teaching as such, astrology has made its way into Jewish thought, as can be seen in the many references to it in the Talmud. Astrological statements became accepted and worthy of debate and discussion by Torah scholars. Opinions varied. Some rabbis rejected the validity of astrology. Others accepted its validity but forbid practicing it. Still others thought its practice to be meaningful and permitted. In modern times, as science has rejected the validity of astrology, many Jewish thinkers have similarly rejected it, though some continue to defend the pro-astrology views that were common among pre-modern Jews. In pre-modern Hebrew, astrology was known as
Chochmat HaMazalot.
Science of the constellations.
Yeah, and Chochma is like wisdom. I mean, you may know the expression of Chacham. And just so those of you who've been to Israel, if you visited the synagogue at Beit Alpha, 6th century CE synagogue, there is just a beautiful, I don't know, maybe if I click on this. Oh, yeah, there's just a beautiful astrological table, and there's the scorpion. Yeah, it is beautiful. And whoops, let's see. Okay, there we go. Okay.
Do you know what, did they come up with their own, like the scorpion equaling this such and such, or did that come from, is it correlation to?
Yeah, well, we may see that in the article. I can't quite remember.
Okay.
But it is, I mean, we've often talked about why 7 is a magic number in Hebrew. And as Bryce taught me, it's the 7 visible moving objects in the heavens. And so it's my own theory, and I think this article mentions it in connection with the tribes of Israel. The reason we have 12 tribes may be astrological in origin, unless, of course, you accept as literally true that Jacob had 12 sons. But even though Jacob has 12 sons, but I don't know if this ever bothered you, it bothered me for a while. Joseph has 2 children, and each of them are tribes. So what's up with that? So we still talk about the 12 tribes, and the answer is that Levi becomes the priestly tribe, and they don't get any land. They're basically supported by the temple. So there's still 12 divisions into tribes, and Levi is not one of them. So there seems to be a need to cling to 12 as a number. And it's my own theory, but I've never heard any confirmation of that it may well be that the idea that Jesus has 12 disciples may also have astrological origins, because I'm pretty sure that in different parts of the New Testament, the number of disciples vary. But basically, we always talk about 12 disciples.
But the months of the calendar is irrelevant somehow. It's not necessarily astronomical.
Yeah, so there's, there's approximately 12 moons to a year, give or take 11 days, actually.
Isn't this true for the number of commandments, 613? We all agree it's 613, but we don't agree which ones are actually they are. But however you count it, it's got to come up to 613.
Yeah, well, let me comment on what I do know, and that is the idea of the 10 commandments are different in Christian counting and in Jewish counting. And I would be hard pressed to remember exactly where the break is, but they are different. 613, I don't know who came up with it, but this, I mean, if you can have a difference just between 10, you certainly can have a difference counting to 613. And I think it's, some medieval rabbi decided it was 613. And I know I have a book on my shelf which lists them.
I think one of the Christian differences on the 10 Commandments, if I can jump in, is it may be a little bit in different order, but the one that always strikes me as interesting is the killing versus murder.
No, that's translation issue. Has nothing to do with the counting.
No, I know that.
Right, right.
Yeah.
No, I think the difference is Jewish tradition counts the first statement. First of all, they're not called 10 Commandments. They're called Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 utterances. And in Jewish tradition, the first one is, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt to be your God. That's number 1. Number 2 is you shall have no other gods before me. That's number 2. Christianity, I think, focusing on the idea that a commandment has to order you to do something, combines those two and splits up another one. And I just don't remember the details. Yeah, and then there's translation issues. In fact, we spent, I think, one session here talking strictly on the question of what does covet mean in the 10th of the 10 commandments. So translation, another very interesting element.
It means whatever the rabbi says it means.
Well, ultimately that's what Judaism is all about. Judaism means what the rabbis say it means. The Bible. So, I often talk about this, the difference between Judaism and Christianity, or a difference certainly, is both are focused as origins or have the Hebrew Bible as the heart of their sacred text. And Judaism interprets the Hebrew Bible through the interpretive lens of the rabbis of the Talmud. Christianity interprets the Hebrew Bible through the interpretive lens of the New Testament and the Church Fathers. And also they begin with the text in Greek rather than in Hebrew. So translation has a lot to do with it. And then, of course, as you know, every time we meet on Saturday morning, we interpret it through our own lens and figure out what it means to us. Okay, so Chris, this is going to now speak to exactly what you were asking about. So
Cool.
if you'd like to continue, as far as can be known.
Sure. As far as can be known from the Bible, astrology was not practiced in ancient Israel during the First Temple period. The Torah contains no references to astrology, and in the Nevi'im, prophets, and the Ketuvim, writings, only obscure references to Babylonian astrologers exist. 2 commandments in the Torah have been understood by some later authorities as a basis to forbid astrology. You shall not practice divination or soothsaying in Leviticus. And should I read this whole?
No, there's no point in reading that. I mean,
Yeah.
you all have the article, so you can, there's lots of footnotes. You can actually track these down. And the second one, when thou
come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not learn to do after the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you any one that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, one that useth divination, a soothsayer or an enchanter, or a sorcerer or a charmer, or one that consulteth a ghost or a familiar spirit, or a necromancer.
Okay, so
Deuteronomy.
Sounds like King James translation. Okay.
These commandments are understood by rabbinic authorities as forbidding astrology.
By some
while
rabbinic
others
authorities. That's just an important word there.
Gotcha. While others limit these mitzvot to other forms of soothsaying and thus view astrology as permissible. The Hebrew word mazalot, which literally means constellations, is used twice in the Hebrew Bible. Specific constellations are also mentioned, such as Orion, named Casil, literally fool, possibly etymology connected with Kislev, the name for the 9th month of the Hebrew calendar, which in turn may derive from the Hebrew root KSL, as in the word.
Hebrew calendar, i.e. November. Oh, okay. I don't know if you mentioned that. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I just skipped that.
Yeah.
From the Hebrew word KSL, as in the words Kesel,
Kisla.
Hope or positiveness. That is hope for winter rains, which is mentioned 3 times in Job 9:9. He is the maker of the bear and Orion. Job 38:31. Can you loosen Orion's belt? And Amos 5:8. He who made the Pleiades.
Pleiades.
All right. And Orion.
Yeah, and in these references, certainly in Job, basically they're describing the power and the might of God who made all these stars and constellations. They're not, and those biblical references, they're not talking about using the stars for divination.
The prophet scoffed at stargazers
Chovarai Hashamayim.
in Isaiah 47:13 and Jeremiah 10:2. Astrologers from Babylon were called Chaldeans, like Abraham, in the book of Daniel. In rabbinic literature, the term Chaldeans later was often used as a synonym with those who practiced astrology.
So just to keep us on track, sort of time frame wise, once we're getting into Isaiah, particularly the later books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Daniel, we're talking about what is called post-exilic literature. So this is now after the exile to Babylon. So we're going to start getting influence from Babylon that we didn't see earlier in the Bible. And of course, the Second Temple period is definitely post Babylon. If you want to keep reading, keep reading. If not, we can get another volunteer.
I'm down to continue.
You're good.
All right. For most of the Second Temple period, discussion of the planets in Jewish literature was extremely rare. Some historians hold that astrology slowly made its way into the Jewish community through syncretism with ancient Hellenistic culture. In prophesizing on the destruction of the temple, the Sibylline oracles praise Jewish ancestors who have no concern about the course of the sun's revolution, nor the moon's, nor soothsayers, nor wizards, nor enchanters. Neither do they astrologize with skill of the Chaldeans, nor astronomize. Oh, for these all are all deceptive. Although the author of the Encyclopedia Judaica article on astrology holds that this view is mistaken. The early historian Josephus censures the people for ignoring what he thought were signs foreshadowing the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. There are many references to astrology in the Apocrypha. The Book of Jubilees said that Abraham overcame the beliefs of astrologers by accepting one God.
And just a note, the Apocrypha, there are a bunch of Jewish books, and when the rabbis finally decided which books are in the Hebrew Bible and which books are out of the Hebrew Bible, there were a bunch of books which had been in the translation of the Hebrew Bible from Hebrew to Greek, but the rabbis didn't include them in the Hebrew Bible. But the Catholic Old Testament, the Church Old Testament, included the Apocrypha. That's maybe more than you want to know about that subject. Okay, Talmudic period.
In early classical rabbinic works written in the land of Israel, Jerusalem Talmud and Midrash compilations, astrologers are known as astrologos and astrologia. In early classical rabbinic works written in Babylonia, astrologers were called, help me out.
Yeah, I don't know these words, but I sort of know how Hebrew sounds. Chaldiyim, Kaladai, and Itz Tag Ninin. But I'm guessing if it was written in Hebrew, I'd have a much easier time reading. But again, the big thing, which I think most of you are familiar with, is with the exile into Babylon, the Jewish world splits into two groups: the Jews in Babylon and the Jews in the Holy Land. And the Talmud that we reference these days is mainly the Babylonian Talmud, Talmud Bavli. There is also the Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud they reference here, and the Midrash is also created. I guess I'm just guessing now that it's basically created in the Holy Land. So you have different groups of Jews, and there's different sets of literature that evolve, and they're going to have different attitude toward astrology, particularly because astrology seems to be embraced in Babylon. So there's going to be a lot of influence there. Okay, is astrology valid?
The most popular form of astrological belief in this period was to regard certain periods of time as lucky or unlucky. For example, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi listed the character traits associated with ones having been born on specific days of the week. Rabbi Hanina dissented and said that character traits are determined by the planet under whose influence one was born. An announcement is found to the effect that it is dangerous to drink water on Tuesday and Friday evenings. Samuel of Mehardia, a physician and astrologer, taught that it was dangerous to bleed a patient on Tuesday, as well as on Monday or Thursday for a different reason, because Mars reigns at the midheaven. The new moon was likewise regarded as an unfavorable season for bleeding, as were also the third of the month and the day preceding a festival. Ecclesiastes Rabbah states that the rulers of some non-Jewish nations were experts in astrology, and that King Solomon, too, had expertise in this realm. In general, many people quoted in the Talmud believed that, in theory, astrology had merit as some kind of science, but they were skeptical that astrological signs could be interpreted correctly or in a practical fashion. In one place, the Talmud states that astrologers gaze and not know at what they gaze at, ponder and not know what they ponder.
I'm just gonna, and know not at what they.
Oh, no, not, sorry.
Yeah.
No, not what they ponder. According to Jacob Neusner, in this period, magic, astrology, and occult sciences were regarded as advanced sciences. To reject them, the Jews and their leaders would have had to ignore the most sophisticated technological attainments of contemporary civilization.
Okay, and Jacob Neusner is the preeminent Talmudic scholar. Bryce.
Yeah, just a little quick comment. I've always found astrology to be best understood in hindsight.
Yeah, like a lot of prophecy, but I
Yes.
actually don't get astrology. I mean, I guess there's no point in debating it, but it seems to me you have two people born on the same day, and they share different fates. So that's.
Or there are ways around that logical issue.
I am sure, because a lot of people do believe in astrology, and my guess is every newspaper you find will have a horoscope, which is often written in such vague terms that you can find yourself in it. But so yeah, so I'm actually more interested in the Jewish historical view. Actually, the specific question you asked, Chris, the Jewish historical view on astrology. So let's continue. We have a few more minutes.
Does astrology apply to Israel? Some rabbis held that the stars generally do control the fate of people and nations, but Abraham and his descendants were elevated by their covenant with God and thus achieve an elevated level of free will. In the Talmud, two rabbis, Rabbi Yohanan and Rav, held that there is no mazal, literally constellation. Sorry, mazal. No, literally, yeah, literally constellation for Israel, but only for the nations. While one held that the contrary, that astrology does apply to Israel. It is said that Abraham predicted via astrological tablets that he would have no second son, but God said to him, "Away with your astrology. For Israel, there is no mazel." The birth of his second son, the patriarch Isaac, then disproves the idea that astrology applies to Israel. Genesis Rabbah states that Abraham was not an astrologer, but rather a prophet, inasmuch as only those beneath the stars could be subject to their influence, but that Abraham was above them.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we're going to see is this sort of general idea that Israelites should depend on God rather than in trying to read the signs. I'm not saying the signs aren't correct, but that Israelites, Jews, should more depend on God. So that's what we're going to get into right now. Is it permitted?
Is it permitted for Jews to practice astrology? Samuel of Nehardia is the only sage in the Talmud who seriously studied astrology, yet he held that it was not compatible with Judaism. Quoting Deuteronomy 30:12, "The law is not in the heavens." He is reputed to have taught that Torah cannot go together with the art that studies the heavens. Similarly, Jose of Hutzal.
Yeah, actually, it's Yossi.
Sorry,
but
Yossi.
No, there's no reason you should know that.
Of Hutzal prohibited consulting an astrologer. We are not permitted to appeal to the Chaldeans, for it is written in Deuteronomy 18:13, "You shall be perfect with the Lord your God." Several sources record that Rabbi Akiva prohibited the practice of astrology. The biblical patriarch Abraham is said to have known astrology, with many people congregated before him to seek advice. This may indicate a more positive attitude towards the practice of astrology.
Okay, let's do the medieval era, and then we'll continue next week.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Go ahead, Alan. Yeah.
It has to do with Kabbalah and the Sfirot. I'm feeling I don't know how to articulate it, but the question is any of this topic reflected in the way in which the ideas of mysticism, as we know as Kabbalah?
So I will tell you how I understand it, which may not be the way other Kabbalists or true Kabbalists would understand it. My understanding is the 10 Sfirot of Kabbalah are 10 aspects in which God interacts with the universe. So one is chesed, loving kindness, one is gevurah, power, and so on. I'm not familiar with the idea, although I think maybe there is actually a section on Kabbalah in this article, I think.
Oh, okay.
And a whole listing of which Sfirot correspond with which signs of the zodiac. But generally, I've never come across that seriously in my reading of Kabbalah. There are, people will say that, we're in the period of counting the Omer now, that on certain days we're under the influence of these two Sephirah, and, examine yourself in light of that influence, which sounds like astrology to me. But astrology, coming from, I guess, astro, is inherently tied to the stars or to the heavens. I guess not only stars, because you have Mars and Venus and, and all these other, but heavenly bodies. Whereas Kabbalah, if I understand it correctly, is really more focused on understanding the nature of God. And
Well,
how we interact with God.
actually, those names don't have anything to do with the planets themselves. Those are constellations, the background constellations that doesn't.
No,
I see what you're
I
saying.
agree
Yeah,
with you.
it's
But people talk
Mars
about you're
is
in Venus
constellation. I
rising
get
and
you.
Mars
Yeah.
descending and
Yeah,
so
yeah,
on.
exactly.
So
Exactly. I understand. Yeah, never
Yeah.
mind.
okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Let's continue.
I just want to say to me, I haven't heard that we are governed during a particular day of the Omer by a combination of things, but rather that we should just focus on
Right.
thinking about them. It just gives us like direction to do it, but it doesn't sound like at all.
Certainly, my reading of the sources would absolutely agree with you. Yes.
Okay.
And I mean, they will lay out a 7x7 grid of the 7 lower Sfirot. And so, you're in a particular day and you're saying, well, now I'm looking at, chesed and gevurah. So loving kindness and power, and how do I focus my life trying to understand God through the lenses of loving kindness and power. But yeah, I don't know that they would say, a particular day of the Omer is a good day to do something. Although we do have Lag BaOmer, which is the only day in which you're allowed to have weddings and celebrations and so on. And in fact, I was reminded, although not many of my wedding couples are very traditional, but one of the reasons why I have a lot of weddings scheduled, I mean, I think not this weekend, but starting next weekend, I have 4 weddings in a row every weekend. But once the counting the Omer is done, that's a traditional time when Jews schedule wedding. Okay, how far long is this? Well, let's do a little bit of the medieval era. I think you read the first paragraph, right, Chris?
I have not.
Okay, so then let's not get into the medieval era. It's 758, and there's plenty of material we can pick up on next time. Yeah, so again, I guess my fascination with studying these texts is to appreciate the surprising depth and range of things that are connected with Judaism. Whereas, I often think about what's sometimes called pediatric Judaism, and that is that we study Judaism, and more broadly in our culture, we study religion, to the ripe old age of 13 or 16, and we come to the conclusion that it's really pretty simple and childish. I mean, what's the definition of childish? Childish is something that children study and adults don't. And of course, the big surprise to me as I started studying as an adult was how much there is. And I think of a word like mazel as a tip of an iceberg, whereas in common usage, and that's of course how it should be used, is in the accepted usage. But everybody knows the word. but it, it uncovers the idea that Jewish tradition does delve into this, into astrology. And so I just really enjoy discovering the depth of the material. And I've been doing this now twice a week for about, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, and we're not even close to running out of material. So I hope you enjoy it, and we'll pick up on the medieval era. I'll stop sharing if anybody has any thoughts.
I have a thought. It's very interesting, your comment about pediatric Judaism. And if people stop studying as soon as they have their bar bat mitzvah, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes. Yep. And I think some of you know Richard and Michelle Jackman. How many people here? Okay, I actually had dinner with Sonia, and I had dinner with them this weekend. We were up in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, no, cool.
Yeah. So Richard, they were both presidents of Temple Adat Elohim.
That's
and
right.
Richard coined the phrase, which I use often as describing myself, which is adult onset Judaism, where, I certainly was born Jewish and had a bar mitzvah, but I never took it the slightest bit seriously until I became an adult. And so,
We're using that term. Besides that, everybody is a Jew by choice. I've seen the term accidental Jew.
Yes, yeah, Jew by chance. I often will say a Jew by choice and a Jew by chance.
That's even better.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, and when you see images of, in art of Jews studying, they are not typically children; they are typically old men. I mean, and of course, then now is becoming men and women both studying. So, any other thoughts before I wish you a good evening?
I had a quick question, actually.
Yes.
Just to follow up, you mentioned the emphasis on sevens came from like 7 bodies, visible bodies.
Yes.
I thought it had something to do with like the lunar calendar, how the moon is more based on like multiples of 7.
No, and in fact, it's not, because a lunar month is either 29 or 30 days.
Yeah.
So there is nothing in nature other than the 7 moving lights
bodies
that move against the fixed star pattern.
Yes.
Which would basically be the sun, the moon, and 5 visible planets. So the theory is that that is a reason for 7 being such a significant number.
7 days of the creation.
So the question is, why 7 days? How did it get? I mean, if you accept the Bible as literally the word of God, you don't question it. You just say, well, God wrote it that way. So
But when they thought of different steps to get from 1 to 7, 1 to X, they got where they wanted by Shabbat.
Well, what's interesting is when you look at other cultures, a huge number of European cultures work the same way, and they work against the moving lights in the sky. Yeah. And the names of the week that we have now are the Norse names in English, because it came from the northern people, the Norse. Those are the Norse names for the moving lights in the sky. You've got a moon day. Tuesday, Tu was Mars, the Norse god that represented Mars. Woden's day, Woden was Mercury, the messenger. Thor's day, Thor was Jupiter. Freya's day, Freya was the Norse goddess for Venus. And Saturn's day, and then of course Sunday. Mm-hmm. So all of those days are the northern people's names for the moving lights in the sky and their principal gods.
Yeah. So as I always say, I love to study Judaism and Jewish texts as though it is literally the word of God, because I think we get great insight insight into the nature of Judaism and our history, because the Jews that came before us until very recently understood certainly Torah and scripture as the literal word of God. But then on the other hand, I also like to study it from a scholarly point of view and you know, and derive insight from both perspectives. But that's me. So any other thoughts?
I'm going to find you the story of this man who was named Mazel Tov, because
Yeah, oh yeah.
I went to a naming at Central Synagogue a few months ago. I don't want to make you listen to the whole service, so I'm going to find the presentation of the reason why this man was named Mazel Tov.
Yeah, no, and it was in the article, so evidently it's not super rare. I was talking with a couple, and I don't think I'm going to be doing their wedding, but the guy's Hebrew name is Mashiach, which I find almost impossible to believe.
No.
Yeah. So
Was it Shearson? Was that the guy?
no, I don't think he was coming with me to get married.
I smell a whole new religion being birthed here.
What kind of shoes was he wearing?
I didn't meet him. We just chatted probably on Zoom, but he insisted.
I just wondered if he was barefoot or had sandals or what.
But I'm not going to argue with someone about their name. Okay, gang. So we'll see you next Monday, and we have a class on Wednesday, and I don't remember what it's about. But
Happy Woden's Day.
Hold on, let me just take a quick look if I have.
Shavuot. Hag Sameach, Shavuot.
Shavuot,
Hag Sameach.
Oh,
Thanks,
yes.
Cheryl.
Have some
Thank you.
cheesecake.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Cheryl.
tomorrow night.
You're welcome, Bryce. Have some dairy.
So
I'm going to. In fact, that sounds yummy.
The subject for Wednesday, our Wednesday class is what does Judaism demand of non-Jews, which is about the Noahide laws, if you know that subject.
I think the principal one is leave us alone.
That actually is not in one of the Noahide laws, but I've heard traditional Jews say that. And, okay, gang. So I wish you a good evening. Actually, yeah, Henry, you're still there. When everybody leave, I'm going to stop recording.